My name is Bruce Reilly, Deputy Director of both, and I pled guilty to a crime I committed in 1994, second-degree murder, and I got paroled in 2005, which obviously, if it was in Louisiana, that never would have happened. So I've been out now I was in for 12 years, I've been out for 13. Stephanie, when you're framing the sort of the initial questions, kind of prompts, I was reminded of this meeting that I had this weekend with a lot of, sort of the usual suspects, talking about the usual stuff, and plotting and planning, things like voting rights. And it occurred to me that a lot of the folks that are resistant to folks with violent crimes getting out of prison, really think that they're preventing bad people from getting out of prison. And by letting people out of prison, it would be, are they not as bad anymore, or are they costing so much money that let's let some bad people out so we can save some money? But they were still bad. It never would occur to them that they'd be letting good people out of prison. They would never think that actually we're keeping good people in prison. So some of it is kind of like the macro meta, kind of top level narrative stuff that we need to shift. And I've also realized over the last, maybe a couple of years that I think one of the bigger problems that we have in looking at this issue is, police officers, when they come up on the scene, every day, it's full of horror, right? They're the ones putting out the tape, they're the ones taking the photographs, they're talking to witnesses about horrible things. And then maybe a year or two later, they're showing up, recounting that horror. And they're back dealing with another horror. The prosecutor is dealing with somebody's one day of their life, and their whole months, years worth of case building is based on one person's day. And then when that person goes away, they replace it with another person's worst day of their life, over and over and over and over again. And all they see is oftentimes a bunch of folks who had a really bad day, who are typically going to be between 15 and 25 years old. There's going to be poverty, there's going to be substance abuse, all this stuff, and one bad day, 1 hour, 15 minutes. And they never see you in prison. Neither does that police officer. They've never walked the yard with a single person in prison. They've never had a conversation like this with anyone in prison. They've never had a cellmate. They've never prepared for a parole board. They've never been on the phone with an aunt, a child, whatever. And then someone, maybe even their descendant, is going to show up 35 years later and say, this bad person is still bad. There is a lot wrong with that equation. Judges, other than the occasional moment where they get to say, you know what, Mr. Yancey, turns out, you know what, John, we might have made a mistake. But for the most part, all they see is that frontline horror, those tragedies. And then these parole boards who are not equipped to deal with all that time in prison, they have no idea about all the good people and good things that happen in prison. And when I got to prison, for the first time in my life, I found all the people like me. I was looked around, you get into the of course, you don't ask questions in the big house. But I wrote a book, that was the first chapter title. But when you walk the yard long enough, and you share the same toilet with somebody long enough, you start volunteering information, and you start learning about people. And I found all the foster kids like me. I found all the homeless teenagers like me. I found all the people whose parents were incarcerated or abandoned them or whatever, like me. And you don't have to have there's no big questioning about why did you do what you did. It's I would question you, how the hell did you make it to college? How did you get out of this crap hole? Because the rest of us, we self-destructed long before. We were fighting everybody and everything. And for me, it didn't matter that I was the gifted kid in school. I was abandoned in 2 months. I'm lucky that I definitely, haven't moved here and lived here for about 7 years. Lucky that my crime didn't happen here. But I also learned through the law and all the cases I knew quite well. Because all my friends were pretty much guys like me, the so-called super predators, who were between 15 and 22, who committed a charge with murder and just labeled us the worst of the worst, like born psychos, born to kill. You know, most of us are old enough to remember all the worst language, which really hasn't gone anywhere. It's maybe not as overt, but the feelings I feel like are the same. And so there was something wrong with us. But I realized, knowing the law, that almost all of us committed a manslaughter. You know, almost all of us had a heat of passion situation, had an intoxication situation. But they didn't care about that. They wanted their first-degree murder stats. So you'd have people pleading guilty to second-degree murder, you know, to kind of give some parole opportunity. But I originally pled guilty to manslaughter, and then they wouldn't go for it because the prosecutor's boss took it off the table the day I went to court and said, no, he needs the murder stats. And I was like, wow, he's petty, huh? You know, and so my lawyer, who I brought on after a while, he says, you know, what do you want on second-degree murder? I was like, I'll take 10 years. The limit was 5. I'd never known anyone to get less than 15, but I was like, I'll take 10 years. And they were going to ask for the max on manslaughter, which was 30. And I just felt like, well, maybe the judge will give me a little bit of rhythm. But I've tried to be really cooperative. And I was in a spiritual space, because it took a year between what I had done and when I got caught. And in that year, everything changed. I didn't need prison to tell me that I needed a massive change in my life. I needed the moment to reflect on what the hell happened to this life. You know, I'd like maybe been given these gifts to do something with, but my life was just so challenging as a boy. You know, and here I was thinking I could like maybe kind of work my way out of it, and I was, you know, selling drugs and doing things, and my dream, believe it or not, was not to be Scarface like some of my friends. My dream was like to play football at Harvard. I was an athlete. For some reason, I had heard that Harvard was a great school, and like I had, you know, crazy dreams like that. But here I was, like just struggling to survive, and you can't rent an apartment when you're like 15, and so you got like someone who's you know, using drugs, who's willing to take money to do that stuff. So it was really a challenge, and then you know, you get into prison, you just see everyone that was like you, and you realize that so many people have good hearts, and given an opportunity to really come together and be a community is all people really needed. And when I got into awaiting trial mode, and I was held without bail for 3 years, I just realized that like the system didn't care about any of that, and they just wanted to crucify me. And it's understandable, because now, you know, from their point of view, here's this evil child who's you know, done the worst thing. Or in New Orleans, I like us to create this post-Katrina trauma assessment tool. Sounds great, right? And like who's going to fight against something to deal with Katrina trauma? But the reality is, these kids that they're calling demons, who are like 20 years old, how old were they in 2005? And what did they go through when they left the Cali with nothing? And came back 18 months later with, you know, a bar of deodorant, or, you know, and a bag full of underwear or something, and now their uncle is shipped off to who knows where, and in prison. Their grandma died because she couldn't get to dialysis, and on and on and on. And yeah, surprise, he's got some issues, you know, and he couldn't go back to school and all that kind of stuff. That's who they're sentencing right now. People who were little kids during the greatest tragedy that anyone around here has ever known. And nobody's bothering to say, hey son, where were you in 2005? I'm concerned about your narrative. I want to know why Gumbo bit the hand, you know? And so creating a rule like that would force them to look.
You know, there is a new program designed specifically to deal with that. It's called Adverse Childhood Experiences, as ACEs. And now they're looking at how that interplays with incarceration, especially in the areas where high poverty, high crime, single-parent households, and particularly even in Baton Rouge now with the advent of flooding, the shootings. There's a new grant that the mayor's office is running through now.
Well, I think we need to force the prosecutors to not spend like 5 minutes on reviewing a case, and force them to see professional assessments of people's past, you know, neutral assessments, and then they might have a little bit more understanding of how to handle, you know, 9 times out of 10 the person needs help, not punishment, you know, and
that happens a lot. I'm not here to defend prosecutors, but I mean, that actually happens more on a regular basis than I think that people know about. I know that every prosecuting agency, the culture is different. That's the thing. The culture of the Orleans DA's office is vastly different than the culture of a lot of the other prosecuting agencies across the state. Baton Rouge's prosecutor's office, the culture there is different. It's shifted a little bit over the course of the past year or so, but there are prosecuting agencies who do try to encourage mitigation. Let's look at the history of the individual. Why are they committing these sorts of offenses? So just like you were talking about, the people who are nonviolent offenders who have this evolving door. For instance, someone who's constantly going into Walmart stealing, I don't know, meatloaf or something. I mean, to me, if I'm constantly seeing that a person's always going to steal underwear, steal deodorant, steal food, then that means to me that they have a need. So what can we do? What's our obligation? What's our moral obligation as the individual when we see that case? That person's file sticks with you, so you tend to know their history. So what do I do to help so that this person doesn't keep going back through this evolving door over and over again? I did want to address your situation because I think that what you experienced is highly unfortunate, and it's unique. I can't say that if I was given your file that I would have seen that this is murder. That's just my opinion. And so, you know, it's important for us to, you know, understand the culture of all of our agencies. I mean, there's a prosecutor up in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia DA. You know, he is his focus with his office is to look for reasons not to bill somebody. Let's start with the reasons not to bill versus looking for reasons to do that. And there are other prosecutors agencies that are following suit, but it's a slow process. Not enough of them are following suit. But you know, if we could have more conversations, when I say we, law enforcement, can have more conversations with folk like that particular DA, then that's how you encourage that type of process, and that's how you get law enforcement more involved in the communities, and that's how you get law enforcement more involved with understanding the mentality of folk. You know, my husband, he's from the 70805 area. I'm from the country, and I can remember a couple of years ago there was a program called Brave, and Brave concentrated on that 70805 area code. Now the Brave program ended up falling to the wayside for unique reasons. But you know, on that side of town, that was the most crime infested, and still is considered the most crime infested town. There are more homicides on that side of town than it is on the, I guess, the southern end of Baton Rouge. And so I think that continuing to have those conversations with those, I mean, you all having those conversations with law enforcement, with those prosecutors, having sit downs. I know Hiller will definitely sit down with anybody. So, I mean, and he's got more of a heart to listen to people, more so than, in my opinion, than a Leon Canizera down in New Orleans. And I'm not saying that Leon doesn't have a heart. I'm just saying that Hiller's heart is a little bit more tender than Leon's. Work to get things done, the things that you all are accomplishing, and if you get DAs on board with at least listening to you, then that kind of starts that conversation within the internal office, because you have to change the cultures within the office before you actually just change the culture amongst the country. You have to start somewhere.